Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, what country are you watching from? I'd love to see where our viewers are tuning in from. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Working nights at Sunset Manor became my normal routine after I got my CNA license. At 24, I needed healthcare experience before nursing school, so I took the first job available. The retirement home sat hidden between almond fields outside Sacramento, where the night wind often whistled through the trees. 53 residents lived there, and most nights passed quietly with simple tasks, taking vitals, helping with bathroom breaks, and fixing pillows for restless sleepers. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood stayed in room 237, the last room down the east wing. She had a habit of staying up late reading romance books with her little light, and she always gave me a wave when I walked by on my 2 a.m. checks. She passed away on a Tuesday night in September 2017, peacefully in her sleep, the way most people hoped they would go. Her family cleared her things within a week, leaving behind just the furniture and the faint smell of the lavender lotion she loved. She had been one of the most loved residents. She had moved from Scotland in the 1950s, and her stories could fill hours. Her voice carried a musical accent that made even her complaints about food sound charming. Beside her bed sat her emergency call button, a red device that sent a beep and displayed her room number at the nurse's desk when pressed. She almost never used it, only on rare occasions. Never one to call for unnecessary help. She was independent and proud she could still dress herself and walk to meals. When she died, maintenance shut off her call button like they always did when a room was left empty. The system in the building was old but steady, put in during the 1980s when the home was first built. Each button was wired directly through the walls. No wireless parts, no batteries, nothing complicated. Just simple and dependable. 2 weeks after her funeral, the call button in room 237 started going off again. The first time was during my Thursday shift, at exactly 3:42 a.m., shown on the digital clock at the nurse's desk. The alarm beeped through the quiet, followed by the voice saying, "Room 237 requesting assistance." I stared at the glowing panel, knowing that room was completely empty. The call button had been disconnected, but there it was. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the east wing. My sneakers squeaked on the shiny floors and the air felt colder than usual, though I guessed it was just the old heater. The door to 237 stood slightly open, which was odd since housekeeping always shut unused rooms tight. I pushed it open and flashed my light across the bare bed, the empty dresser, and that call button hanging uselessly. Everything looked normal, untouched, waiting for the next resident. The following night, the same thing happened. At 3:42 a.m., the call button for room 237 activated again. This time I went straight to the maintenance office and left a note for Tony, the repair guy, explaining the issue. It had to be a wiring short or maybe moisture in the system. The place was old and little things went wrong sometimes, especially when the weather changed. Tony had been there for years and knew the building better than anyone. When I came in the next night, I found his note waiting. He wrote that he checked room 237 completely. The button was disconnected at the box, no power going to it, no faults showing anywhere. "Must be mistake," he had written. His handwriting was neat, like everything else he did. But I knew what I saw and heard. The lights on the panel didn't appear for no reason, and the system voice didn't lie. On Saturday, I decided to test it for myself. Instead of staying at the desk, I carried a chair halfway down the east wing and set it right across from room 237. At 3:35 a.m., I sat down with my phone clock, ready to see for myself. The building creaked softly around me, the wood shifting with the temperature. The lights hummed above, bright on the beige walls and old carpet. From one side I could hear Mrs. Chen in 235 snoring, and from the other, Mr. Patterson's TV playing some late-night movie. Everything seemed quiet and normal, but at exactly 3:42 a.m., the alarm went off again. The panel at the desk lit up, but my eyes stayed locked on room 237's door. It stayed closed, no movement, no flicker of light, nothing. Still, the voice called out, "Room 237 requesting assistance." The sound carried down the hallway, longer than usual. My nerves spiked as I stepped up to the door and turned the handle. Inside it looked the same. Bare bed, silent room, dead button. Nothing had changed. But stepping back out into the hall, I froze. There were faint footsteps moving away from me toward the locked exit door at the far end. My heart pounded as I shined my light down the hall. The beam lit the walls, the doors, and finally the big exit door with its warning sign. "Emergency only, alarm will sound." The footsteps had been real, the steady sound of soft-soled shoes like a nurse would wear. But the hallway was completely empty, no place to hide. I checked each room along the way, all shut and locked, residents sound asleep. The exit door was locked, needing a card key, and if it had opened, the alarm would have gone off. I tried the handle anyway, solid and secure. Pressing my ear to it, I only heard the faint hum of the building systems, nothing else. Over the next week, I kept detailed notes. Every night at exactly 3:42 a.m., room 237's call button triggered. I wrote down the weather, which residents were awake, and whether I heard anything strange. It never changed. The same time, the same voice, and when I listened closely, always those soft footsteps down the hall. The other staff brushed me off. Janet from Days would laugh and say, "Old buildings make weird noises." But she hadn't heard what I heard, hadn't seen the panel lights flash every night. Tony even brought in an outside electrician. Both of them ran tests again and again. Still nothing. No power, no faults, no cause. The system looked perfect, yet the calls kept coming. My turning point came on a Tuesday night when I tried a new plan. Instead of running straight to the room, I stayed at the nurse's desk and watched the hallway camera. The building had old black and white cameras hooked to a VHS recorder. The East Wing camera had a full view of 237's door. At 3:40 a.m., I sat in front of the screen, ready to record. The seconds dragged as I stared at the empty hall. Then right on time, 3:42 came, and the alarm went off. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then I caught it. Something shifting. A shadow slid away from 237's doorway, heading calmly down the hall toward the exit. It didn't walk like a normal person, more like it was gliding, but it moved steady, as if it knew the way. I sat frozen as it reached the exit door and simply vanished, melting into it as though the door wasn't even there. My hands shook as I stopped the tape, rewound, and played it again. The same thing. Empty hall, alarm, shadow moving, disappearance. This wasn't the building settling, wasn't wires crossing, wasn't me losing my mind. Something was pressing that call button every night, then making its way to the exit door without ever opening it. The time on the tape read 3:42 a.m. Exactly. Matching my notes exactly, I pulled the tape out and slipped it into my bag. Finally, I had proof that I wasn't imagining any of it. But that also meant whatever was going on at Sunset Manor couldn't be explained in any normal way. The next night, I made a choice that probably wasn't the smartest. With the video as my backup and my mindset on solving this once and for all, I stationed myself right outside room 237 at 3:40 a.m. If this shadow figure really came out of Mrs. Blackwood's old room, then I wanted to see it directly. That hallway felt different that night, like something heavy was pressing down around me. The air was thick, almost storm-like, and it made me feel uneasy. I leaned against the wall opposite the door, flashlight ready in my hand, my whole body stiff with nerves. The minutes ticked by on my phone, 3:41, then 3:42. And right on time, the call button alarm rang out through the quiet building. But instead of running to check like usual, I froze in place and watched carefully. The door to 237 stayed shut, but then I heard it, the slow, deliberate sound of the handle turning from inside. And then, almost against reason, the door started to move open. What stepped out into the hallway is something I'll never forget. It was the shape of an old woman in a worn nightgown, moving with that same slow shuffle I remembered so clearly. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood walked out, looking just as she had when alive, except her eyes were different, pale and clouded, staring straight ahead without seeing. She passed right by me like I didn't exist, her slippers making no sound at all on the linoleum floor. My throat locked up, and my body wouldn't move no matter how much I wanted to. She kept going, walking straight toward the exit door at the end of the wing, the same path I had seen the shadow follow on the video. When she reached the end, she didn't stop. She walked through the metal door itself, slipping into it like it wasn't even solid. I stayed frozen in that hallway, time stretching and bending until minutes felt like hours. Eventually, I managed to pull myself back to the nursing station. I sat down at the desk, picked up a pen, and wrote out my resignation letter right then. Some things aren't meant to be figured out, and some night shifts last longer than any paycheck is worth. There was a stretch in 2019 when I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour diner just outside of Des Moines. I had just moved back to Iowa after a rough breakup in Chicago and needed work, anything at all, to cover bills while I tried to reset my life. The job was easy and repetitive, which was exactly what I thought I needed. Most nights were dead quiet, a couple of truckers stopping in, and the same three old men who showed up like clockwork for coffee and eggs at 3 a.m. I didn't care for it, but it felt safe in its boring way. The diner sat off the highway with its flickering neon sign and a parking lot that always looked like it belonged taped off in a crime scene photo. Inside, the booths were cracked vinyl, the jukebox hadn't worked in years, and the whole place carried that stale diner smell. My shift was midnight to 8 a.m., usually alone until the morning cook showed up around 6 a.m. That night started like any other. I was wiping the counter, half watching some infomercial on mute, when I noticed the bathroom occupied light had been on way too long, at least 20 minutes. Nobody had come out. I knocked, called out, no answer. Thinking maybe someone got sick or passed out, I unlocked the door. Before the light even came on, the smell hit me, sharp, metallic, enough to make me gag. When I flipped the switch, my heart started pounding. Bloody handprints smeared across the mirror, streaks sliding down the sink, one on the towel dispenser, another dragged down a stall. But no one was there. No mess on the floor, no body, no blood in the toilet. Just those prints, pressed like someone had placed them slowly and carefully. I locked the door again, shaken. My first thought was to check the cameras, But the monitor behind the counter didn't have an angle on the bathroom, only the hallway leading to it. I rewound about 30 minutes, watching closely. Between 12 o'clock and 12:45, not one person had gone down that hallway. The last customer had left at 12:03, a guy in a red hoodie who took a slice of pie to go. After him, nothing. Just emptiness. I was still replaying it when the front door chimed. He walked in stiffly, like his legs weren't working right. Mid-30s, tan windbreaker zipped all the way up, despite the heat inside. His eyes jumped around the diner like he expected someone to jump out. I asked if he wanted coffee. He just stared, then said, "Have you seen my friend?" He was supposed to meet me here. I asked what his friend looked like. The man blinked, scratched his head like he couldn't quite remember, then muttered, "Tall, brown hair." He was right behind me. My stomach sank as I looked toward the cameras again. I had just seen the feed. He came in alone. No one else even near him. I tried to stay calm, told him I hadn't seen anyone. He nodded and took a booth by the window, sitting rigid, both hands pressed flat to the table. He didn't order, didn't move. After a few minutes, I checked the tape again, frame by frame. Only him came in, doors opening once. Nothing behind him. Not even a shadow. Yet there he sat, waiting for someone who didn't exist. I carried him a glass of water just to break the silence. He looked up and said, soft as a whisper, "The bathroom." Maybe he's in the bathroom. I froze, thinking of those bloody handprints. I asked if his friend had been hurt. He blinked slowly, then whispered, "He told me not to come in, but I came in." That's when I noticed his hands shaking under the table. I backed behind the counter, needing the distance, because something about how he sat there made my skin crawl. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. I didn't know what I was reporting exactly. Just a man looking for a friend who wasn't there, and blood in a bathroom nobody had entered. The dispatcher promised to send someone. I left out the details about the smell and the cameras. I just needed backup. The man stayed frozen, not moving a muscle, even when the door chimed 20 minutes later. Deputy Carson walked in, glanced at me, then at the man. I pointed to the hallway. Carson checked the bathroom. Less than a minute later, he came out, asking me if I had cleaned anything. I told him no. He radioed backup in an ambulance, just in case. That's when the man suddenly stood, calm and silent, and walked toward the bathroom like it had just occurred to him. Carson told him to stop. He didn't. He opened the door and went inside. Carson followed. I couldn't see, but after a few minutes, Carson came out again, alone. His face pale, voice steady as he asked if I was sure I saw the man come in. I said yes. He glanced back at the hallway, then muttered, "There's no one in there." They took my statement, copied the footage, asked questions I couldn't answer. No missing person reports ever surfaced. The tape they kept showed me unlocking the bathroom, staring at the bloody mirror, then backing away. The prints were clear on video, but the man, he wasn't there. Just a flicker of static around the time I remembered him walking in. I never worked another overnight shift after that. 8 months into working the graveyard shift for the Metro Transit Authority, I thought I had already seen everything the underground had to throw at me. Rats as big as cats, homeless folks sneaking through locked doors, and the occasional drunk who stumbled onto the tracks thinking they could shortcut home. At 26, it wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid for my apartment in Brooklyn and gave me enough time to keep thinking about finishing my engineering degree. The 4th Avenue station had become my second home. I knew every bolt, every panel, every corner of those tunnels like the back of my hand. Most nights followed the same routine. System checks, cleaning, and making sure nobody wandered where they weren't supposed to be. The motion sensors, exits, and cameras all had their quirks. Little issues I'd learned to work around. But what happened that November night was nothing like any quirk I'd dealt with before. The shift started out normal. I clocked in at 11:45 p.m., grabbed my gear, and went down to the platform where most of the work happened. The tunnels were actually comfortable that time of year, not sweltering like summer or freezing like winter air that seeped in from above. My order never changed. Southbound platform first, then electrical, then a sweep of the three tunnels connecting to other lines. Around 2:30 a.m., I was finishing an electrical panel check when something odd showed on the monitors. The motion sensors in Tunnel C were going off at random, showing movement near the mouth of the tunnel. I switched to the camera feed, but the screen kept cutting to static, flickering in and out. Could have been a rat, could have been loose trash blowing, but the rules were clear. Any unusual sensor activity had to be checked in person. I grabbed my flashlight and started toward Tunnel C. It was the deepest one, leading down to the express line under the local tracks. The entrance sat about 50 yards from the main platform, reached by a long maintenance hall most passengers never even noticed. As I walked, my footsteps echoed strangely, the kind of hollow sound that bounced back with a slight delay, as if the walls themselves were answering. The air felt colder as I got closer to the tunnel entrance, and I could hear the low rumble of a train moving through one of the other lines. About 10 feet inside the tunnel, a motion sensor was mounted, placed there to detect anyone stepping in from either side. I stood at the edge, shining my flashlight into the darkness, expecting the usual things. Maybe a piece of trash stuck on the rail, or one of those big rats that always seem to live in the tunnels. Instead, I saw her. A woman in a dark coat stood about 20 feet inside, right next to the express tracks. She wasn't moving at all, just standing there with her back toward me, so still that my chest felt tight. The express trains ran every 12 minutes, even late at night, and she was close enough that the wind alone from a passing train could push her over. I called out quickly, "Hey, you can't be in there." She gave no reply, didn't even turn her head. Her long dark hair hung straight down her back, and her coat looked expensive. Nothing like what you'd expect from someone lost in the tunnels. The way she stood wasn't normal either. She looked like a mannequin placed there on purpose. Too stiff, too perfect. I had to get her out, but rules said I had to radio it in first before approaching. My hands shook as I pressed the button on my radio and called dispatch. "Control, this is Maintenance Unit 7 at 4th Avenue. There's a civilian in Tunnel C about 20 feet in, standing next to the express tracks, requesting immediate backup and train delays on the express line." The reply came fast. Dispatch said they were alerting transit police and told me to keep eyes on her but not get closer until help arrived. I kept my flashlight fixed on her while waiting, and that's when I noticed more strange details. Her coat wasn't just dark, it was pitch black. So black it seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight instead of reflecting it. She also wore heels, actual dress heels, which made no sense at all for someone down here. The rumble of the next express train was growing louder, that familiar vibration that started soft and rose into a roar. I had maybe 3 minutes before it tore through. I yelled, "Ma'am, there's a train coming. You need to step away from the tracks right now." I dropped protocol and stepped into the tunnel. The sound was growing, and I could already see the faint light of the train's headlamp turning around the far curve. She didn't move, not an inch. No shifting of weight, no sign she had even heard me. It was like she was locked in place, ignoring the danger. I started walking toward her, my boots echoing sharply against the tunnel floor. But the closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The air around her seemed wrong. Colder, heavier, like I had stepped inside a freezer. At about 10 feet away, I realized her coat wasn't just touching the floor. It was spilling outward around her feet unnaturally, spreading like liquid in a way that didn't make sense. The train's light was clearer now, and the noise was overwhelming. That's when she turned. I can't forget that moment, no matter how hard I try. Her face wasn't a face at all. It was smooth, pale skin with no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank surface stretched across bone, framed by long black hair. My flashlight shook in my hand as I stumbled back in horror. In that instant, I knew for sure this wasn't a normal person. This thing wasn't human. The express train was maybe 30 seconds away now, horn blasting as it sped closer, but she just stood there, blank face turned toward me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was frozen, my legs stiff, my throat locked tight. Then the figure tilted its head like it was curious about me. Slowly it raised one pale hand and waved. The motion was calm, too calm, almost mocking. The train shot into the tunnel like thunder, its headlight flooding the darkness with harsh light. I pressed against the wall, squeezing my eyes shut, bracing myself for the sound of her being hit. But nothing came, only the normal rush of a train passing, the click of wheels on metal, the gust of air, the rumble fading into the distance. I opened my eyes and swung the flashlight toward her spot. She was gone, completely gone. The tunnel was empty. No woman, no coat, no trace of her at all. I stayed pressed against the wall, shaking, my heart racing so hard I thought it might burst. The sensors had gone quiet again, showing no movement in the tunnel. She had vanished as if she had never been there. When I finally moved, I stumbled back to the monitoring room and pulled up the sensor logs. The record showed it clearly. Motion picked up at 2:31 a.m., constant activity until 2:47 a.m., then nothing. But what made my blood run cold was the entry and exit data. Sensors at both ends of Tunnel C showed no one entering or leaving for more than 6 hours. The system tracks everything larger than a rat. People, equipment, anything that crosses the checkpoints. The logs were clean. The only entry recorded was my own, at 2:35 a.m., when I went in to check. I ran the tests again and again, checked each sensor, even called the night supervisor to confirm nothing was broken. The system was working perfectly. By those records, I had been completely alone the entire time. But I know what I saw, and I know that thing raised its pale hand and waved at me before it disappeared. Transit police arrived about 20 minutes later. 2 officers, both looking tired and not happy about a call like this. Officer Williams was a veteran, 15 years in the subway, while Officer Martinez was younger, but already had the hardened attitude from dealing with all the chaos underground. I told them what I saw, but even to my own ears, it sounded insane. A faceless woman in a black coat standing in a tunnel, vanishing the moment the train came through. They listened, wrote notes, then swept all 3 tunnels with strong flashlights. Nothing. No prints, no dropped items, no evidence of anyone unauthorized. Williams said maybe I saw strange shadows from the train light, mixed with debris caught in the air current. Martinez didn't waste time. He asked me straight out if I had been drinking or if I was on any medication that might mess with how I saw things. I got through the rest of my shift in a haze, just going through the motions of the last checks, but I kept looking toward Tunnel C again and again. Every shadow made me uneasy. Every little sound set me on edge. When my relief showed up at 8 a.m., I practically ran out of there, but I couldn't just let it drop. Over the next few days, I began digging into the history of the 4th Avenue station during my free hours. What I discovered only made me more unsettled. The station had been built in 1976 over the remains of an older terminal that had been torn down after a deadly accident in 1968. A woman named Victoria Ashford had fallen onto the tracks during rush hour and had been killed instantly by an oncoming train. The old newspaper stories described her as wearing a long dark winter coat and having long black hair. No one ever figured out if she had jumped, been pushed, or had simply slipped. The part that really got under my skin was that several witnesses said she had been standing very close to the edge of the platform, not moving for minutes before she fell. Reading that shook me because it matched exactly what I had seen: the strange stillness, the way she stood near the tracks. I quit 2 weeks later. I told my boss I wanted to focus on finishing my degree, which wasn't a complete lie. But the real truth was, I couldn't take working down in those tunnels anymore. Each night shift became a nightmare, always waiting to see if she would appear again, always wondering if next time she might do something more than just wave. I never saw that faceless woman again, but other workers began reporting odd motion sensor triggers in Tunnel C over the months that followed. The company replaced the equipment more than once, yet the strange readings continued. Management eventually brushed it off as some sort of electrical interference from the older wiring. But I know better. Victoria Ashford never left. She is still down there, still near those tracks, still waiting. I can't help but think the faceless thing I saw was her way of showing me what death took from her. Not just her life, but even her very self, her face, the thing that made her someone people could recognize. I never went back to see, and I never will. Music, I had posted this on RR Glitch in the Matrix before, but I thought it belonged here too. It still chills me when I think about it. This happened almost 6 months ago. At the time, I was working overnight security at Riverside General Hospital in Ohio. It's one of those old brick hospitals from the 1970s with endless halls and that strong, sterile smell that never leaves. The pay wasn't great, but the job was simple enough. Make rounds, check locks, monitor the parking areas, and keep things quiet through those long hours between midnight and sunrise. By then, most of the hospital was empty after visiting hours, leaving only the necessary staff upstairs on the medical floors, and me walking around with just a flashlight and radio. The radios were standard issue, just basic two-way units used by security, maintenance, and supervisors. Each of us had a call number, and dispatch kept logs of every message that came through the main desk. On most nights, there was barely any radio traffic, maybe a maintenance call about a broken light or a nurse asking for an escort to the parking lot. The channels were supposed to be secure, but sometimes we'd pick up random interference from truckers or construction crews. I never thought much about it until one Thursday in March when things went wrong. Around 1:15 a.m., while walking the third floor, I heard a faint crackling voice on my radio. At first, I thought it was just static or someone pressing their mic by accident, but then I heard it clearly. A child's voice, maybe 7 or 8, asking, "Hello, is anyone there?" The voice was so small and faint through the speaker that I almost ignored it as interference from a toy walkie-talkie. But this was the middle of the night in a hospital, and the pediatric wing had been closed for renovations for weeks. There weren't supposed to be any children in the building at all, much less awake and playing with radios at 1 a.m. I froze in the hallway, holding the radio close, waiting. The building around me was silent except for the hum of the air system and the occasional beep of equipment from the rooms. Then half a minute later, the voice returned. "I can't find my mom. Can you help me find my mom?" This time it was clearer, and I could tell it was definitely a little boy. His voice shook like he was scared, but trying hard not to sound it. I keyed my radio, asked him who he was and where he was, but got nothing but static back. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 minutes before silence returned. I called dispatch right away, reporting what I had heard, thinking there had to be a missing child somewhere. The night supervisor, Linda, checked the patient logs and confirmed what I already knew. No kids admitted, no visitors, no children anywhere in the hospital at that time. She said it was probably outside interference. Maybe a neighborhood kid with a cheap radio. That made sense, and I almost let it go, until it happened again the next night, at almost the same time. This time the boy's voice asked about his teddy bear, a brown bear with a red ribbon. On the third night, it really got to me. Again, just after 1:20 a.m., his voice came through. This time he said he was cold, that he wanted to go home. He sounded so real, so upset, not like a kid messing around. My chest tightened as I listened. I started rushing through my rounds, checking every hallway, every dark space. The hospital felt different that night, bigger somehow, with shadows that seemed darker. Every creak of the old building made me stop and listen. Back in the office, I decided to check the radio logs myself instead of just reporting it. The system recorded every call with time, duration, and unit number. I scrolled through the last 3 nights, looking around the 1 to 2 a.m. window. What I found made no sense at all. The transmissions were coming from Unit 47 Delta, which had been listed as stolen 2 years earlier. I checked the records again and again. That unit had been marked missing since January 2021, and a police report had been filed. Yet here it was, active in the system, sending clear audio of what sounded like a terrified child. I spent the rest of the shift digging through old reports. The theft had happened during heating system repairs, but the security footage was long deleted. Unit 47 Delta had been assigned to the pediatric wing, the same wing that was now under renovation. I couldn't stop thinking about the boy's voice, how scared he sounded, and wondering how a missing radio could still be transmitting. On the 4th night, I was ready. I waited near the sealed pediatric wing around 1, radio at full volume, trying to catch the source. The area was blocked off with plastic and barriers, but I had master keys if needed. At 1:18 a.m., his voice returned, clearer than ever. "My name is Tommy. I'm 6 years old and I can't find the way out." My heart raced. This was the first time he said his name. I answered right away, told him I was coming, asked where he was, but he didn't reply. The signal kept going almost 5 minutes. Tommy described a room with broken toys and peeling wallpaper. He said he was scared of the dark and wanted his parents. His words hit me hard. I stepped inside the old pediatric area, flashlight in hand. The walls had been stripped to studs, wires, and pipes everywhere. But in the corner I found an old toy box, still full of stuffed animals and broken toys, just like he described. The wallpaper he mentioned was still there too, faded cartoons peeling off. As I stood there staring at the playroom, Tommy's voice came through again on the radio. "The security man is here. I can see his light." I spun around, shining my flashlight across the room, but there was nobody there. That's when I really started to panic. Tommy could somehow see me, but I couldn't see him. I shouted out loud, asking where he was, telling him to follow my voice, but the only reply came through the radio. I think I'm stuck. I've been here for a long time. I searched that playroom from top to bottom, moving boxes, checking behind old hospital equipment, even looking up into the ceiling tiles, but I didn't find anything. The whole time, Tommy kept talking through the radio, describing exactly what I was doing. When I moved the toy box, when I looked behind the hospital bed, when I stood in the doorway looking confused. It was like he could see me from somewhere I couldn't reach. The scariest part was how his voice started getting weaker each time, like the radio battery was running out, and he kept saying over and over that he was cold and wanted to go home. I ran back to the security office, called my supervisor, then the hospital administrator, then anyone I thought might know what was going on. By the time the morning shift came in, a crowd had formed around the radio logs, everyone staring at the impossible proof that Unit 47 Delta was still sending out signals. That morning, the hospital called in a tech specialist who traced the source and found something unreal. The missing radio was buried in the base of the new parking garage that had been built 2 years earlier, right where the east wall of the old pediatric wing used to be. When they dug it out, they found Unit 47 Delta still working, somehow kept alive by a damaged power line, along with some personal belongings that had once belonged to a child named Tommy Mitchell, who had been patient in 2021. The transmissions ended right after the radio was pulled out, and I never heard Tommy again. No one could explain how it was even possible, but I switched to the day shift the next week because walking those halls at night was never the same. Quick stop off Route 70 in Kansas became my second home after I started working the graveyard shift to help pay for nursing school. At 24, the work seemed easy. Ring up gas, restock drinks, and try not to fall asleep in the dead hours between 2 and 6 a.m. The store sat like a bright island on a lonely highway, surrounded by endless wheat fields stretching out in every direction. Most nights, maybe a dozen customers came in, truckers grabbing coffee, college kids picking up late-night snacks, or the occasional insomniac stopping for cigarettes or energy drinks. After 6 months, I thought I'd seen every type of person who passed that stretch of road. The bright lights buzzed overhead constantly, giving everything a sick yellow tone that made even healthy people look pale. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with cleaning spray had become as familiar as my own perfume. During those slow hours, time felt strange. Minutes dragged like hours, and I ended up counting the bugs outside by the lights or memorizing the expiration dates on candy just to keep busy. The cash register was an old clunky thing that slammed open like a slot machine every time. Cameras blinked from the corners with their tiny red lights meant to scare shoplifters. Most nights, the only sounds were the hum of the coolers, the occasional car passing without stopping, and the same country station repeating the same songs over and over. I got used to the quiet and even started bringing my school books to study. My boss, Pete, who had run gas stations since before I was born, always said the night shift was perfect for students because nothing ever happened after midnight in Kansas. He was wrong, but I didn't know it until that Tuesday in February. It was 3:17 a.m. when I noticed him. I only remember the exact time because the digital clock above the counter had been frozen on 3:16 for what felt like forever, then ticked to 3:17 just as headlights pulled into the lot. A dark blue sedan stopped at pump 3. It looked old, maybe early 2000s, with a dent in the passenger door and a bumper sticker I couldn't read. The man who stepped out was average height, wearing a worn brown leather jacket and faded jeans. What I noticed right away was how careful his movements were. Not rushed like most people that late, but steady, almost practiced. He pumped exactly $12 of gas, no more, no less, staring at the numbers like it really mattered. When he finished, he walked to the store at the same calm pace, keeping his head low, never once looking at the security cameras. The bell chimed when he walked in, and he moved through the aisles like he already knew where everything was. He picked up a bag of salted peanuts, a bottle of water, and a pack of spearmint gum. The total came to $4.67, and he paid with exact coins, down to the penny. I tried to make small talk, asked how his night was, but he only nodded slightly and made a sound so quiet I couldn't even tell if it was a word. He never really looked at me, but I could feel his eyes studying me as I rang him up, watching every move like it mattered. His presence made the store feel smaller, like the walls were closing in just a little. After I gave him his receipt, he lingered longer than he should, standing there in silence before finally turning and leaving without saying anything. The next night, Wednesday, I almost forgot about him until 3:17 a.m. rolled around again. Same blue sedan, same pump 3. I watched as he repeated every step. $12 of gas, same slow walk, same items in the same order. Peanuts, water, gum, same price, same exact change, same quiet response when I tried talking. The only difference this time was when he lingered at the counter, he finally looked up just enough for me to see his eyes. Pale blue, almost gray, with a sharpness that made me want to step back. There wasn't hate in them, but something else, something calculating, like he was memorizing every detail of me for later. After he left, I caught myself staring at the clock, realizing he'd been in the store for exactly 7 minutes, just like the night before. The precision of it all was starting to make me uneasy, but I told myself I was just imagining things. Maybe he worked a factory job with a strict schedule. Maybe he had habits he couldn't break. Maybe it was just chance. Thursday night came and the same thing happened, down to the minute. Friday night, the same. By Saturday, I was already waiting at the window at 3:15, staring at the empty road and feeling silly for expecting him, like it was some kind of appointment. But there he was again, right on time, repeating his steps like he was following a script. The sameness of it was worse than if he had changed something. At least a change would have felt human. Instead, every night felt like watching a replay, and I began to notice details I had missed. He always parked his car angled toward the exit, leaving the engine running the whole time. He never bought anything that would spoil quickly. His leather jacket never seemed to collect dirt, even though it looked old. The thing that got to me most was how he seemed to know exactly where I'd stand behind the counter, always placing himself so he could see me without looking directly at me. By Sunday night, it was so predictable that I started timing him. And of course, 7 minutes every time, never off by more than a few seconds. Monday morning when Pete came to open, I was already waiting for him outside. I had been debating all weekend about whether I was overthinking everything, but the routine stuck in my head too strongly to ignore. Pete was in his 50s, straightforward, and had managed the place for 20 years. So if anyone would know, it was him. I told him the details and he listened carefully, the way he usually did only when stock went missing or something broke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long while, chewing his toothpick. Then he mentioned the security cameras, how they recorded everything, but only kept 2 weeks before recording over. He pulled up the footage, and we watched the same scene play out each night, The same car, the same jacket, the same steps. Watching it on screen made it worse, like we were looking at evidence of something about to happen. Pete agreed it was strange enough to take seriously, and he said he'd ask the day staff if they knew the man or the car. He gave me his personal number too, and told me to call right away if it ever got more serious. That Tuesday night, I felt safer knowing someone else knew. I stood at the counter with my phone ready, Pete's number pulled up, waiting just in case. 3:15 passed with no car, 3:17, then 3:20, then 3:30. For the first time in a week, nothing showed. Instead of relief, I felt uneasy, like I was waiting for something that never came. The silence was worse because now I didn't know what to expect. Maybe my talk with Pete scared him off. Maybe he noticed I was watching, or maybe it just ended. I spent the whole shift checking the clock and staring out the window, but nothing. Wednesday night was the same. Quiet road, empty store, me telling myself it was over. Around 2:45, I was restocking cigarettes when a car pulled in. My chest tightened. I thought it was him, but it was a red pickup. A woman in scrubs stepped out, filling her tank. She was probably a nurse on her way home. She came in, grabbed coffee and a sandwich, chatted about how slow the hospital had been, and left. Normal customer, normal night. The kind of shift I used to always have. But watching her taillights fade, I realized I was still tense, still expecting that blue sedan. The clock dragged as it reached 3:17, and when nothing happened, I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt like eyes were on me from somewhere outside the lights, hidden in the dark. At 3:25, a car pulled into the exact spot where the sedan always parked, angled toward the exit. But it wasn't the blue sedan. It was a gray compact, newer, quieter. The driver never got out. The engine stayed on. Headlights stayed off. From the counter, I could see the shape of someone sitting there, but not their face. What I could see, though, was the jacket. The same worn brown leather jacket, down to the way it sat on the shoulders. The car stayed for exactly 7 minutes. The whole time, I felt like I was being studied. My heartbeat was so loud I could hear it over the fridges, and I backed into the blind spots where I couldn't be seen. At the 7-minute mark, the car pulled away slowly, without the driver moving or acknowledging me. The second it left, I called Pete. It was almost 3:35, and I knew I'd wake him, but this was beyond strange now. He picked up after 4 rings, groggy but alert when I explained. He told me to lock the doors, only open for real customers, and he'd be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, I pulled up the camera footage on my phone, rewinding to watch. The video was grainy, but it showed everything. The exact timing, the jacket, the car. When Pete arrived, he brought coffee, looking serious, and we went through it together, talking over what it could mean. Either the same man switched cars to avoid being noticed, or someone else copied him exactly. Both ideas made my skin crawl. Pete decided to call the sheriff's office and told me I should transfer to day shift for safety. I never worked another night there. 2 days later, Pete called to say the sheriff had watched all the recordings and filed it as suspicious. But since no crime happened, they couldn't do much except drive by more often. The day manager, Betty, said she asked around town about a man in a brown leather jacket with a blue sedan, but no one knew him. What got to me most was not knowing who he was or why the routine mattered. 6 months later, when I finished nursing school and moved to Denver, I drove by the store one last time in daylight. It looked so small and alone in the empty fields, like someone had picked it out on purpose. I never found out if the visits went on after I left, but even now during night shifts at the hospital, when it's quiet and I pass dark windows, I think of that brown jacket and wonder if someone is out there, following their own strange schedule, watching someone who doesn't even realize it. The precision still chills me because whatever it wasn't random. It was deliberate, and it probably didn't end. It just moved somewhere else. You'd be surprised how quiet a funeral home gets after dark. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that presses on your ears like the whole place is holding its breath. Back then, I worked part-time at Weaver and Sons, the only funeral home in a small Kentucky town called Halverton. I was 26, still figuring life out, and got the job through a friend of my uncle's. Most nights were slow. Clean up, check the visitor book, switch off chapel lights, make sure no programs or tissues were left. Nothing glamorous, but it kept my rent paid at the bakery apartment downtown. That night had been for Harold Finch, a local man who used to run the hardware store and liked model trains. I barely knew him, but people turned up. Old neighbors, grandkids, the usual quiet sobs and folded tissues. It ended around 8:30, and by 9:15 I was making my rounds, locking doors and scrubbing the last coffee urns. The chapel, our main room, was dim. Only the aisle sconces and a single light above the casket left on. It was standard to leave it lit overnight. Creepy, sure, but normal. I was halfway through the dishwasher in the staff kitchen when I heard it. 3 knocks. Hard, spaced out, like someone rapping knuckles on wood. I froze, thinking maybe the building was settling. Then it came again. Same rhythm, same weight. Not from the entrance or office, from the chapel, where Mr. Finch's body still was. I stood there a second, hands on a mug, then walked to the desk in the hallway where the monitor sat. Only 3 cameras, front door, back hall, and one wide shot of the chapel. The chapel feed lagged a little, but was clear. I stared at it, arms crossed, trying to explain the sound away. The room was empty, just rows of chairs, the casket, the soft light. 10 seconds passed then, plain as day, a figure moved into view. Tall, broad, in a dark coat. They didn't walk in.